AP, all right, welcome back to your flip. And I haven't seen you yet. It's 8:04 in the morning, and we just finished up announcements, so we're going to go ahead and try and get after it. We're going to have to end up doing this flip in about like 2 different parts, basically, because I got to go sit with Miss Connie and Miss Susan, talk to them about the Europe trip and stuff like that. But we've been doing a lot of awesome stuff in class today, but I know I could go ahead and do this because we're going to spend the time in class today going over our last few artworks. And when I say last few, I mean like 10 of them, so we're going to have to hustle. We are committed to getting these artworks done today. Like that is a thing that we are doing. We are getting those artworks done today. But the other thing that we have to start on with this flip is we have to start talking about the fact that this unit has actually like 2 parts to it, right? There's the Renaissance piece, and then there's what's known as European exploration, right? So now 9 times out of 10, whenever you start learning about European exploration, you always end up hearing about like, oh, this person, or oh, that person, or whatever. The first thing y'all need to kind of embrace is a couple of just key dates, right? One, apparently this brainiac, went west and actually ran into the Caribbean in 1492, right? So if he actually does this and sails out towards the west trying to find his way to India in 1492, and then Michelangelo does the Sistine Chapel ceiling from 1508 to 1512. Well, that went off here. But if he does it then, that means that Columbus in the period of exploration was occurring while the Renaissance was happening, right? So both of these things are happening at the exact same time. A big thing you need to start doing is kind of creating in your mind marquee dates to hang your hat on, right? So 1492, 1508 kind of shows us that the exploration period was going on during this time. And also, though, this isn't the first time we've talked about exploration or anything like that in general. We, over the summer, kind of had a rewind back to the Middle Ages, and we discussed how the Indian Ocean was known as the Monsoon Marketplace from about 700 to 1400 AD, and that it was a center for trade for almost 1,000 years. While the Europeans were going through the Middle Ages, and most of them didn't know how to read or write, or their universities didn't exist and things like that yet, and as they did begin to progress and exist, it was much more focused on theological Christianity concepts. The Easterners, on the other hand, were like, hey, we're just killing the game right now, right? They are trading gold and salts and silvers and porcelains and silks and teas and all of these other items throughout the Indian Ocean, and it was referred to as the Monsoon Marketplace due to the fact that the monsoon winds would actually blow from east to west and west to east at different times of the year, carrying their vessels back and forth, making trade very easy and very, very efficient for them, right? All the while over here, we're just sad face, really sad, really, really upset, not doing anything fun at all. And they're actually just not having very booming economies, and they're not really producing anything on the level that our Middle East territories or Arabic kingdoms, our West or Eastern Coast Africans, or our Southeast Asians are producing, right? Look at those terrible, terrible lines. Now, big thing though, is like we said, we had all kinds of luxury goods that are going on during this time period. From 700 to 1400, the Eastern Golden Age, you're seeing the luxury items of spices and ivories and salts and silks and porcelains being traded over this large, expansive body of water known as the Indian Ocean, and nobody in this part of the world even knew that this stuff existed yet. So that's also a good thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Now, the thing about it is also, everybody's like, well, then what did Columbus do? Okay, calm down, okay? You have to understand that there were more European explorers before Columbus. Some people came before him that tried to do different things that would eventually lead and push him to doing what he did, which is trying to find a route to India going westward, right? So one of the very first ones was a guy named Marco Polo. You know that goofy game you played when you were a kid in the pool and stuff like that? And you were just like, and you did that. It's actually based off a real person, right? So Marco Polo was a Venetian explorer, okay? And this guy decides to get together with his dad and his brother, and they're dedicated in the idea of trying to find a Venetian trade route that goes to India directly to cut the middleman out so they can make more money off those all-important spices, right? So the big thing about it, though, you got to understand, is that Marco Polo and his associates were paying a lot of money to import spices so they could then actually sell them to other countries in Europe. And spices are a very, very big item during this time period because if you were wealthy, you had them on your table, right? One of the biggest ones was black pepper, right? But you also had things like cardamom and cinnamon and other types of spices that were kind of popping up in the Indian subcontinent because that's where they grow naturally. They want them, and it's a sign of the increasing economic times to have these spices at your access because they don't only just flavor your food. They make medicine. They preserve food. They do all kinds of other stuff. Like, so, they make luxury items like perfume, right? Hardcore smells and scents were used with these spices. So this Venetian explorer and his family decided they wanted to try and figure out a way to go about land to get there, right? So here, right there, is where Marco Polo is, in Venice, in northern Italy, right? And then he wants to go deep, deep, doop, 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 doop. And he wants to try and find his way to India through the north, right? Because he wants to get right here to India or possibly to Southeast Asia and modern-day China and also in the area known as just like the Southeast Asian continent, right? So he wants to get this direction by land. Now, there's a big problem, though, that he has to deal with, and that's the fact that this whole swath of territory is controlled by a very, very large empire of people known as the Mongolians, right? The Mongolians, under their leader Genghis Khan, actually extended their rule outside of their present-day area all the way through Russia, all over this entire area, and even into Southeast China down here was controlled by one group of people. And that expansion began in the 1200s under a guy named Genghis Khan, right? So Genghis Khan, though, died in 1227. However, his empire still lived, and Marco Polo was trying to find his way through it because the Mongols allowed Christian traders to move through their lands. They weren't that upset about it. Now, I hear somebody in the background right now, and I think it's Annabella, is like, but wait a minute, Mr. Terry, I'm super smart, and if I were Marco Polo, I would have gone through the Middle East and then hopped right over right here. That makes way more sense. Well, he couldn't do that, Annabella. That's a fantastic point, though. This is why we should have let you be our navigator instead of Marco Polo. But the big thing about it is he couldn't actually go that direction. We'll talk about why that is here in a little bit, okay? Let me get rid of my little edits. There you go. So the big thing, though, also, is he reported back on his travels and his findings, and he lied about a lot of stuff, right? So, like, he was like, oh, we did make it to India. Never actually made it to India. Oh, we saw people with faces in their chest. Never actually saw that. He reported on seeing these monsters and stuff and all this other creepy things. And so we know that he actually was kind of making a lot of stuff up and that he actually basically just bounced around the Mongol Empire for a while, right? Now, on the flip side, to show you just how intelligent the Eastern empires were, this right here is Zhang He, right? Zhang He was the Chinese admiral for the emperor of the era during the European Middle Ages. And Zhang He was a very, very intelligent and wicked smart guy, right? So Chinese admiral that took over 7 different voyages, over 12,000 miles, trading and exploring the entire Indian Ocean, figuring out ways to actually go with the wind, against the wind, and navigate this massive body of water to make even more money for his people. Now, the thing about it, though, on the flip side is Marco Polo's wandering around the Mongol Empire trying to find his way to get to India, and Zhang He's just bouncing around the whole thing in these kinds of boats right here. Zhang He actually had a fleet of what was known as treasure ships, right? Treasure ships under Zhang He, massive, massive vessels. Because look how big this thing is compared to a Spanish caravel that Columbus would have taken. Columbus boat, this big. Zhang He treasure ship, this big. And Zhang He's treasure ships could go all the way from China all the way to India to pick up spices, to the Middle East to pick up other items, to the East African coast to get mahogany and ivory and gold and salt, and they could bring all that stuff back with incurring minimal cost, no middleman, and making it so that they could trade their items with those parties. For example, in Ethiopia, we have found Chinese porcelain possibly related back to Zhang He's treasure voyages, showing that they had contact and traded with one another while Marco Polo is wandering around in the dark. So the big thing, though, that you also got to understand is apparently he lost one. So apparently he lost one of his treasure ships, and they actually sunk to the bottom. Well, it actually sunk to the bottom of the ocean. And it's never been found. So there's a chance that there is a treasure ship that is down at the bottom of the ocean that has gold and salt and ivory and spices and a lot of really cool stuff on it. So I think after Italy, that should be our next trip. It's just the quest to find Zhang He's missing treasure ship, and also I get to keep 70% of it. Y'all get 30. All right. So now anyway, but just to give you another kind of glimpse into this whole thing, is the Christians in the Asiatic kingdoms were even just looking for different things, right? While Zhang He's got treasure ships and they're all about making money and scientific advancement and cartography, the Christians were all about finding monsters and missing Christians. All right, so this is just to give you a glimpse into the difference of intellectual value when it comes to these two different groups of people. So this right here is what Christians believed existed in the waters, and it's why they didn't want to travel over great distances over waters. Things like leviathans and krakens and all these other major sea monsters that will obviously just destroy innocent boats worth of people, right? And so they were afraid of that. And then also on top of it, they were like, oh, we're going to run into all these devilish people that have faces in their chests or one eyes or giant feet, apparently. Like, the Christian kingdoms literally believed that these people, like, existed out in the wild in these different places, that there were people with wolf heads and chest face and, like, all this other stuff. This shows you how uneducated and unknowing the European kingdoms were during the Middle Ages, right? They even apparently started a myth about this guy named Preston John, right? So Christian communities were like, we need to explore other areas and go into Africa because we believe that there is a man there named Preston John or Priest John who is a white Christian that lives in Africa but can't get to us to be with us because of the Islamic empires in the northern area of Africa. So I'm not kidding when I tell you this. The Europeans thought that a guy named Preston John lived like down here towards Ethiopia, and they were like, only we could get to them, but we can't get past the Islamic kingdoms that live in these territories, right? This is some of the dumbest stuff I've ever heard in my life, but this is actually what they thought. You can like Google this and look it up. But Annabella, this is why the Christians couldn't actually go through the Middle Eastern territory, is because it was controlled by the Islamic empires. And the Islamic empires did not allow Christian traders to travel through their lands due to these little wars called the Crusades, where they actually like hated each other and killed thousands of each other for over 100 years, right? So that prevented Christian traders from actually traveling through this area. So basically this door is shut and you just could not go that way. But what about Preston John? Preston John doesn't exist, all right? So calm down, Samantha. Preston John doesn't exist. Now, the other big thing, though, on top of all this, is that I have to take 2 seconds and I have to run off real quick. So do me a favor, go ahead and jot this down, and I will be right back, and we will pick this up after I go talk to Miss Susan and Miss Connie about the trip stuff. Be right back. Now that you've had enough time to like jot that stuff down about Africa or whatever, we also have to take 2 seconds to kind of embrace the understanding that Africa during the time period of like the Middle Ages, European Middle Ages, that Monsoon Marketplace era, had several different like major empires that not a lot of people realize, right? Because typically they only associate this area of the world during the Monsoon Marketplace period with like tribal groups and things like that, which is not necessarily true because there were major ones like the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Swahili East Coast states, right? And there was even one at one point of Ghana and Mali when they actually provided most of the world's gold, right? So the African kingdoms were major players in the world stage, especially when it comes down to that Monsoon Marketplace. When Zhang He's sending those treasure ships over there, he wants African gold, salt, and other items as well. But also another really big product that's going to be coming from there is also slaves as well. And we'll get into all that understanding of why that happened, and how the Portuguese were actually major contributors to that entire event. But we'll get there here in a little bit as we keep going. But yeah, welcome back to part 2. So the African kingdoms like Ghana and Mali, who provided all that world's gold, were really focused around major different mines and had massive empires during that time period, as you can see right here. Songhai Empire, Ghana, and Mali, through these different periods of 1500 to 1600, were really solidly large, right? And then also that everyone knew apparently about this mythical person, not mythical actually, Preston John is fake, but this guy was real. In Middle Age maps, it actually depicted this man that apparently lived in North Africa from the Malian Empire, and his name was Mansa Musa. And Mansa Musa apparently had so much access to gold that he is literally the richest man in history. Like, he could like buy Bill Gates and Elon Musk right now and it wouldn't hurt his pocket even a little bit, right? Mansa Musa had access to those gold reserves as well as salt and ivory as well in the Malian Empire that he actually ruled over. Mansa Musa had so much money that when he converted to Islam and then traveled from where he was in Timbuktu all the way to Mecca to try and do his Hajj or his pilgrimage for his faith, he actually ruined the economies of other states due to the fact that he spent so much money that he caused a lot of inflation. That's how much money Mansa Musa had. All the while Europe is just like, please, sir, Can I have some more? I'm so poor. Now, the big thing about it, though, going forward even more, is that, yes, Africa was majorly involved, and that is kind of a big reason why the Europeans couldn't just cut through that way as well, right? There were empires here that prevented trade from getting to India. So as you're seeing as time goes on, Europe is just becoming more and more landlocked, and the only way that you have to get to India to get your spices and stuff is to go through this way, but geographically that's almost impossible, as Marco Polo figured out. But then you have the Ottomans and the Persians, right? So the Ottomans and the Persians were these intermediaries for world trade, right? The Ottomans and the Persians were the two different major kingdoms of the Islamic empires. So the Persian Shiites were major importers and exporters of silk that was coming from China, as well as Ottoman Turks, who were Sunnis at the time, took Mediterranean sea trade after taking over Constantinople. So something that you really need to understand is a very, very important fact, is that there were two major Islamic kingdoms that kind of served as the world middleman and the biggest world shipment individuals that would bring goods to Europeans, but they didn't want it the other way around. They didn't want Europeans coming to them and passing through their areas to actually get a hold of the direct source in India, in China, and where these other items were. They were like, you cannot come through here, right, Annabelle? Because the Ottomans would have been right here, and the Persian Shiites would have been right there, right? So they prevented travel going through their kingdoms, so the Europeans, yet again, have no way to access India, geographically speaking, right? They were these huge importers and did all this different stuff, and also a big thing about it was that since they prevented travel to Christians during the later Middle Ages, as well as due to the fact of the Crusades and other wars that they had, the Christians also developed this very negative view of the Arabic kingdoms and of Muslim kingdoms in general, believing that they were a threat to their religion and their economic security, which is absolutely dumb and ridiculous. They had nothing to do with that, and they had no intention of going to Europe and doing anything over there. Look at Isabella and Ferdinand. They did not have to do this Spanish Inquisition Reconquista, force convert all these people. They did it because they feared something they didn't understand. But you know what a good way to understand something a little bit better is learn about it, instead of just being like, oh no, we're not the same. Now, anyway, but the big thing about it, though, is just to show you, is even when after Columbus landed in the Caribbean and discovered new lands and people and items and different goods, that following decade in France, there were 2 times as many books printed about the Muslim threat to France than there were about a guy discovering a new half of the planet. Not discovering. A guy accidentally stumbling into a new half of the planet. But that's insane, that basically they were more focused on this idea of this foreign Muslim threat than they were actually focusing on the growth of their worldview, right? And on the eve of the Renaissance, right leading up to it, something that you need to know is some of the earliest other reasons why all these different areas that begin to explore is due to the fact that here in Italy, there were 2 states, Venice and then Genoa right here, okay? So they were the ones that actually cornered the market when it came to Mediterranean sea trade, okay? So they didn't feel that they needed to go out and find a route to India as much as everybody else did, due to the fact that they had a very good market going already. They actually would trade with the Ottomans, with the North Africans, with these other individuals, and bring the products in and then sell them to the rest of Europe. So Genoa and Venice were making a lot of money, and they were the ones that controlled all the goods that reached Europe, but they hated each other's guts, right? So Venice was the biggest importer out of all of them and was the big golden child when it came to the Renaissance period trade networks, right? Venice was a major importer of spices, silks, carpets, very hot items in Europe at the time, very in season, these carpets, these Persian rugs and things like that. They traded Easterners gold and European goods, which were garbage that nobody wanted. They all mainly just wanted the gold and the money stuffs for their wares, right? So the Venetians would go to either one of 2 cities. When it was the Byzantinians, they went to Constantinople. But jot this down. Cataclysmic event occurs in 1453. 1453. Please write down 1453. It's very important. The fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks, right? So the Muslim empires under the Ottoman Turks took over Constantinople and renamed it Istanbul, right? Istanbul now is the capital of the largest Arabic and Muslim kingdom in the world at the time. And the Venetians were freaking out there for a minute. They were like, oh, crap, who are we going to trade with now? But then the Venetians, they're really smart, right? So they decide to create an embargo with the Ottomans saying, look, we'll come and buy these goods from you, and we will sell them back in Europe, and you will make a handsome amount of money. And the Ottomans were like, okay, I don't see that as threatening at all, but we're only going to trade with you guys, right? This made Genoa really, really upset because they controlled a couple of different areas of trade, including the Black Sea, which is the northern route from Asia. The Black Sea is actually located right there, right? So they wanted to be able to pass through Istanbul and trade with these goods, but once it fell to once Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, right, they were cut off. And so they hated Venice even more now because they took this major trade artery away from them. And so the Genoans are scrambling around and they're trying to figure out a way to like bring some zeal and some guile back to their city and to like beat the Venetians out. And they were the first ones to try and explore the Atlantic. They were the first ones to send ships out to be like, there's got to be a way to get around. There's got to be something else out there. There's got to be a way to get to India out there somewhere. And all the ships never came home. So, like, in 1291, that didn't really go very well. So they shifted their focus to the Mediterranean after Venice controlled the spice trade coming out of Istanbul when it fell to Constantinople. So this rivalry is really important, too, because it kind of shows you that the Italians, the location and home of the Renaissance, did not care about trying to find this huge route to India all of a sudden. They were much more focused the entire time about controlling the Mediterranean. And that is where the Renaissance went down. So in the early Renaissance period, the big thing about it is that's why they weren't trying to like shoot out into the Atlantic, because it was terrifying and scary. And when Genoa did it, all their ships got lost, right? So why didn't the Europeans try exploring, though? When they finally decided to do this in the early 1400s, as around like 1450s, 1430s, why did it take that long? Why did it take until the 1400s, after 1291 in Genoa, when they lost all their ships in the Atlantic? Why did it take so long for them to go out there and try to find new stuff? A lot of it has to do with the lack of technology, right? So the Europeans had no idea how to build or construct vessels that could travel into the wind, right? So you have to understand something that is very, very, very Western, is a shape of a sail. Western boats have square-shaped sails, and they did ever since the Minoan period, all the way in ancient Greece in the early in the 2000s BC. Square-shaped sails make it so you can only travel one direction with the wind behind you. Well, the Easterners had figured out a long time ago, during their Golden Age period, in that Monsoon Marketplace period, that actually triangular sails allow you to cut through the wind and catch the wind, and you actually can travel in like a little zigzag going all the way through the entire way, right? So the caravel was a major invention that they actually came upon because they learned how to do it from the Arabs and also from the Asiatic communities, right? Making smaller, lighter vessels that could sail into the wind. And that didn't actually appear in Europe until the late 1300s. You also saw this thing known as the fly compass, right? A flying compass is a spinning compass that you would actually be able to hold in your hand. That's very, 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 very important. So with this compass, they could navigate much easier, and they constantly knew which direction they were going. But did they invent this? No. The Arabs invented the fly compass, right, as well as the Chinese. The other really big one was the astrolabe, and the astrolabe actually gives you the ability to chart your longitude, right, where you are on the planet based on, what's it called, the North Star, but it had the Polaris, right? So with an astrolabe, you actually looked through this device, also developed by the Arabs, and you actually spotted the North Star in this scope, and you measured the degree from the North Star to the horizon, and it let you know how far up on the Earth you actually were, given or depending on the season, right? So these technological advancements allowed everyone to finally start navigating, right? And in the 1400s, some European countries are like, well, I have a boat that can sail into the wind. I have a fly compass. I have better maps and cartographical sciences. And then I also have this astrolabe. So I should be able to, like, go and explore some things, right? Maybe I can go around Africa. Maybe I can do this. Maybe I can do that. But everybody thought the Earth was flat. No, they didn't. All right, so everyone knew that the Earth was round, okay? Everyone's known the Earth is round since 150 AD, when Ptolemy's geography actually put it out there. The ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans all knew the Earth was round, okay? Stop listening to this garbage from a cartoon that you heard at one time. That they all thought that the Earth was flat. They thought the Earth was flat in like 700, like during the early Middle Ages, and maybe some during the High Middle Ages. But Columbus knew the Earth was round. He did not think it was flat. All right, so get that out of your mind. No one thought the Earth was flat. Calm down. All right, so now, but wait a minute. some of you are still saying to yourself, so why didn't they just figure out a way to go through this way, right? Because they can't go through here because the Islamic kingdoms are there. They can't go through here because the Islamic kingdoms are there. They can't cut through this way and they got to get to India and Southeast Asia. Why didn't they just continue to try and find a trade route that would cut through the mountains and then get through to India? That made the most sense, right? Well, something happened. And then the Mongols turned into Islamic kingdoms. The Mongols ended up converting to Islam, and so every Christian navigator felt really upset about this because Ottomans are going to start taking power as trade rulers. Mongols now are not going to allow Christian traders to come through their kingdoms. The Europeans are going to be dependent on Muslim middlemen, and so basically in the long run, now these Christian kingdoms in Europe are really, really in a lot of trouble, right? So because they can't figure out what they want to do. But then enter two very important places. Write these down. Enter Spain and Portugal, right? Spain and Portugal decide that they are going to be the countries that figure this out. Portugal decides that they want to go around Africa as their way to get to India, and the Spanish decide later on that they want to go west and see if they can pop up on the other side, right? They want to see if they can just pop up over here and then bounce down to India that way. So this all, of course, was dependent on this new technology, this new sciences, these new ideas. And so since the Ottomans took power away from trade rulers and they controlled that entire northern Africa area, the Mongols went to Islam, someone had to figure this out, right? And everyone was aware, speaking of, that the world was round and that they could have figured this out. And so Spain and Portugal decided to go in these directions, and also all the even world maps at the time were suggesting that you could have done it, because that right there was a globe of the planet right after, or the year that Columbus sailed. This is the globe that was actually issued about the planet. And so as you can see, they knew Africa was a large continent. They knew it was going to be hard to navigate, but they didn't know that there were two other continents out there, right? So the Portuguese had the big idea first to go around Africa. They wanted to take the Muslims out of the game, and they wanted to go all the way around Africa and basically cut them out of the middle, right? And when they went around Africa, they had to actually go in this giant zigzag with the caravel due to the wind currents that are coming off Africa, because the wind is constantly blowing into your face. But again, that's why they could never do that during the Middle Ages until they had their caravels, their new ships that could actually cut into the wind, and they would just go and they just wanted to bounce around Africa until they actually made some trade ports to get all the way there. And the guy that's going to bring that in is a very, very special figure named Prince Henry the Navigator, right? Prince Henry never became King of Portugal, never was King of Portugal, never would be King of Portugal, but he wanted to measure up to his older brother who was in line to become King of Portugal. So Prince Henry the Navigator decided to fund major missions to try and get all the way around Africa to find routes to get to India, right? He wants to increase Portugal's commercial holdings. He wants to find the river of gold that he believes exists, not the actual river of gold, but a proverbial, metaphorical river of gold that would exist by finding a way around Africa, getting to India, and buying spices directly from the Indians rather than Muslim middlemen, because every single time a trade good changes hands, the prices increase, right? So the Portuguese were paying a lot for spices and East Asiatic goods due to the fact that these Muslim middlemen were the ones trading it through everyone, right? So they didn't want to pay those prices, and they wanted to keep the money for themselves. So the Azores Islands they discover on some of their earliest voyages were some uninhabited islands off the coast of Africa. They end up also establishing the motivations for exploring. It's three things that all start with G. The Portuguese kind of believed that they were exploring for gold, God, and glory, right? So like the idea that they want to find money, they want to spread Christianity, and they want to be the most powerful European empire, or the most powerful European country financially and trade-wise. So that is your glory perspective, right? So then as the Portuguese vessels began to bop all the way around Africa, they started creating posts and forts, and they also started establishing plantations and growing sugarcane on them off the coast of Africa, right? So the Portuguese then also started trading in their earliest big items, gold and slaves, right? So it is at this point that they begin to trade different goods to African kingdoms for gold, and they also begin to trade goods to other Africans to acquire slaves. So the slave market boomed because of the Portuguese and the forts that they established on the western coast of Africa, right? So all of this, of course, because of Henry the Navigator. Now, speaking of all this stuff, slavery and sugar is basically where most of the money by the Portuguese was actually made. Slavery is going to pivot from the Black Sea to an African base, right? So in the Roman period, Middle Ages period, as the like, Where they acquired indentured or forced labor from was 9 times out of 10 throughout the Black Sea or Northern Europe. So the very first slaves that actually existed in European kingdoms were impoverished, uneducated, and indentured servants from areas that you would now consider like southern Russia, Crimea, the modern-day Ukraine, right? Well, then the Portuguese realized that they had technology that tribal Africans wanted, right? So they, like, for example, the Portuguese had never seen guns, ammunitions, other items like that, processed textiles. So they wanted these different items. The Portuguese decided to trade those items for African slaves because due to the fact that African tribes routinely fought wars against one another and the losing side would become the slaves of the winning tribe, they had an excess amount of slaves of their own to actually trade to the Portuguese. Now, the problem is that the Portuguese then got a bloodlust. They sought more money, they wanted to get spices from Asia, and they had some issues getting there, but they are then going to try and figure out a way to not only sell spices, but also trade in human flesh, which is the most messed up thing on the planet. Like, holy crap. Like, how did you decide I'm just going to trade human beings? It's so screwed up. Now, the other thing going on is that eventually the Portuguese actually got to the southern tip of Africa, mostly due to this guy. His name is Bartholomew Diaz, right? Bartholomew Diaz is the first one that's going to go get all the way down to here, right? Bartholomew Diaz, though, went deet, doot, deet, doot, deet, doot, deet, and then had to turn around, right? So Bartholomew Diaz realized that the southern tip of Africa was super chaotic with storms. So he actually named it the Cape of Storms because he was the first one to get there, but he couldn't get past that point. So with the fact that Bartholomew Diaz, though, did stay there and actually opened a door basically by providing a strategic location right here of an actual Portuguese fort, it was not until another guy came along by the name of Vasco da Gama, who actually is going to be the one that pops up and goes all the way around. So Vasco da Gama in 1457 is the very first guy to make it all the way past the Cape of Storms and then all the way up to India. Now the thing about it, though, is when he did this, that cape got a new name. So rename this now really quick and circle it on your notes. It's called the Cape of Good Hope. So since Vasco da Gama made it all the way past, it was no longer called the Cape of Storms anymore. It was going to be referred to as the Cape of Good Hope. Since he got all the way there, he loaded his boats down with hauls, massive hauls of spices, and came back and they sold for a boatload of money. Get it? Get it? Isn't it funny? All right, so now look. But the big thing, though, that's going to end up happening, and this is where we're going to end, is that the Portuguese became the suppliers of all things Eastern first, okay? The Portuguese actually got all the way past Africa with Vasco da Gama, found India, started trading spices all the way back to Europe, and started making an excessive amount of money trading spices and slaves and sugar, right? So also just having gold on their hands. After allying with local Indian rulers, they create a little rulership in that area, and we will talk more about this later on. But then here comes this guy, Columbus, when he tries to want to figure out a way to take this away from the Portuguese. We'll talk about that in class.